Hello and welcome to episode 48 of the Page One podcast. I'm Tarek.
I'm Marco. Thanks for joining us at the Page One podcast. If this is the first time you're listening to us, welcome. At the Page
Where
One.
have you been?
Yeah, exactly. You've missed out on so much. So many great guests. Joe Cornish, Alistair Campbell, Dirk Maggs, just to name but three recent guests. But at the Page One podcast, we like to speak to writers of all kinds. Authors, comic book writers, screenwriters, video game writers, any kind of writer, to try and find out about how they turned their dream of writing into a profession, make money out of it, and got into the industry, and also try and get as many hints and tips about writing from them as possible, and speak to them about their past body of work. And as I say, we've got a great catalogue of guests there, so please do check that out if this is your first episode. But we are adding to that great catalogue today, Tarek.
We are indeed adding to that catalogue, because today we are chatting with the wonderful Cathy Bramley, who we had a lovely conversation with. She's written a whole host of books. I guess you'd call them Romcom chick lit? Is that appropriate?
I don't know. She might disagree with that.
She might disagree with me.
Yeah. Certainly a sort of a romantic novel, female protagonists
Yes.
finding their way through life, I think, is...
Yes, that's a much better way of putting it, Marco.
Yes.
Thank you. And she has a really interesting way of publishing her books, which is a serialisation. And she puts them out in 4 parts. Each part comes about 2-3 months after the other. And at the end of it, she then puts all 4 parts in one big book. And it's a really unusual way of working. I've never read a book split into 4 parts before.
No, not since I read Great Expectations or something. You know, it's a very...
Back in 1840 when you were
no, you are allowed to read books from an old time. It doesn't mean you had to be around at that time.
Mark was 105 for anyone that's just tuning in for the first week.
I didn't mean I read the serializations. I was meaning that those books by Dickens were serialized. And since then, it's not a common thing to get serializations in modern times, I guess. I can think of some authors. Alexander McCall Smith serialized one of his books in The Scotsman, I think. So it does happen, but it's pretty rare. And actually, doing it in that quarterly basis, I thought was really interesting, hearing why she does that, and also that it gives the stories a kind of natural rhythm, natural up and down, because it's not just like a daily serialization where it's just a few hundred words. It's a good chunk of a book. It's 30,000 words, so there's enough there to get into the characters, get something happening, but you almost have, like, I think she described it as a sine wave through the book. So it always keeps your interest, I think, which, even if you're not reading it as a serialized thing, it works as a whole novel as well. And
I think when you're writing it, I'd imagine that, psychologically it must feel easier than writing 120,000 words. I'm going to do 30,000 words. I'm going to almost have a big, proper beginning, middle and end, and then have a break and then start part 2. And I think breaking it down to kind of manageable chunks is quite a nice way to think about it. I've never thought about it before, but I quite like that idea. Yeah,
well, so we talked to Cathy about all of that, and also we hear about how she first started in self-publishing and the very interesting way that she launched her first book, which was quite ingenious, to be honest. But we'll get straight into the podcast after a quick advert for our writer's notebook, which you can also check out at the link in the podcast description. And we'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat and to let you know about next week's guest.
But for now, on with the podcast.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realise it's not just a story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page one.
So I think I'm right in saying that you ran your own marketing agency for years. Were you writing while you were doing that? What made you make the push into the writing world?
I had a marketing agency for 18 and 19 years in the end. I started writing sort of 18 months towards the end of that, and it gradually became more and more important to me. I'd been looking for something new, but I just couldn't think of a job that I wanted to do at all. And I just thought, running my own marketing agency was fun, but it's sort of come to the end of its life, really. I wanted something new and I wanted a challenge. And I thought we'd just built our own house, actually, going back a step. We'd built our own house and I'd been doing a blog, blogging every week about the build so that we would have a record of it, because you forget so much of what happens, certainly on a weekly basis. So I was writing this blog and everybody sort of, all the builders were like ducking down when I came near them with a camera, like, oh God, here she comes again. And by the end of it, they were all posing, at the side of the can I be on it this week? Can I be on it? And the local paper, the Nottingham Post, did a monthly update on the house and everything. So it was just great. And cool. I really enjoyed the writing of it. And I found that actually the writing of it was what I really enjoyed. And there wasn't a lot, but I just enjoyed it. And I sort of missed that once the house had been finished. So there's a number of things that happened, but I thought, well, I really enjoyed writing that. Maybe I could write something else. And I've always been a big reader. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to give it a go.
That's quite interesting. So it almost sounds like, your kind of passion for writing was almost a bit of a surprise. Something you didn't realise you had it inside you until you started doing the blog.
Yeah. Well, as in marketing and PR, you're doing a lot of writing, but it's obviously, well, I say non-fiction, but press releases, touch and go. So I was writing things for sometimes TV advertising in my earlier career, press releases, news features, that sort of thing. And so I'd always written, and you can't just wait until you feel like it. You've got to sit down and just write it. So I'd always written, but it'd never been something from inside me. It was never my writing. So it really did surprise me. It really did surprise me when I really enjoyed writing fiction.
And how did you come up with the first idea then? What was it that made you want to tell that first story?
Well, it was actually to do with the house, because we'd just built this house, and you learn so much when you're doing something like that. We'd never built a house before, obviously. We had builders, but my husband pretty much project managed it. And I thought, I now know all about this, building a house. So maybe I should write something about somebody building a house. And I had my husband actually inherited his father's bungalow on quite a big plot of land. And I thought, maybe there's something there about inheriting a house, and so I just sort of played with the idea and kept going, sort of digging at this idea until I came up with something which I felt could carry a novel. It took me a long time. I threw away a lot of versions, before I ended up with Conditional Love, which was my first self-published novel.
Yeah, and I was going to say, so you went down the self-publishing route initially. Now, was that a conscious decision, or did you try sending it out to agents? No, you just wanted to do self-publishing.
Because I'd been involved in marketing, I knew that if I could actually, I didn't know if I could write a book, but I thought if I can write a book, I can market it.
Mm-hmm.
I should be able to get it for sale, and I should be able to get it under people's noses. So I thought the challenge to me was not so much the publishing side, but it was the writing. So once I'd written one, I thought, right, now what I'm going to do is I'd sort of simultaneously been writing a second. So I thought, here's my plan. I'm going to write this book. I'm going to launch it, publish it on Amazon. I'm going to do really well. And and I'd found an agent I really wanted to work with. I'd been sort of following her for a year while I was getting my book ready for publication.
Mm-hmm.
I thought once I've published it and I'm doing really well and I'm basking in this huge author program, I'll send it to her. I'll send the second one to her, and with a view to saying, right, I've done this. I've sold this many books. It's absolutely brilliant. How could you not want to take me on? And honestly, I can't believe, looking back, and I'm saying it like this because I can't believe I was so confident that it was just going to work. I had plan A, no plan B, that's what's going to happen. But I was able to pull in some of my marketing skills. And when I self-published Conditional Love, we've got a village phone box here, which has been converted into a book exchange. So I spoke to the parish council and I asked them if I could take all the books out and just fill it with my own. And I thought, we can't have a big book launch because obviously I haven't got any money, nothing behind me. So I'm going to go for the world's smallest book launch. And I approached Guinness World Records and I said, I'm having a book launch in a phone box.
That's an excellent idea.
And had a load of paperbacks printed, stuck them in the phone box. Honestly, I was expecting Norris McGuire to come along with his tape measure and check it out. Because I thought, you do get this. Isn't there a record for the number of gymnasts you can get in a phone box?
Yeah,
I thought,
I'm sure that's
yeah.
What about a book launch?
Yeah. That's a great idea. Make it a kind of quirky thing that has a bit of a kind of a hook to people. And exactly. Yeah. So what happened?
So I invited the mayor to come along and do the opening.
Wow.
I didn't tell him it was in a phone box. I just said book launch, and then I had his secretary. He said, I would be delighted to. I support literary, endeavours in the region. And I had his secretary ring up and said, we've looked on Google Maps and we can't see a bookshop. It's like, don't worry, just look for the bunting. You'll see us. So bless him, he got out of his mayoral car with his wife, with a full regalia on and everything, and he put up this big ribbon and he cut the ribbon on the phone box.
That's
and
excellent.
Got in it with me. It was absolutely brilliant. And of course, it had quite a bit of press about that, and it's still wheeled out to this day, pictures of me in the phone box with my books. So that was a really good start.
It's a brilliant idea to generate some buzz.
Yeah, it did work. And so I thought, it doesn't matter if the book's good or not. People will remember the fact that it was in a phone box.
And is that, for someone who's doing it themselves without going through a publisher, is that or not maybe the most important thing, but one of the most important things is that first launch, is that making that impact as strong as you can from the get-go.
Because the thing is, people will write a press release to say something like, author writes book, effectively. And it's not news. You've got to find a hook and you've got to find a way to stand out. And that's the thing, is it's not important. Doesn't matter what's important to you, the writer. You've got to find out what's important to the reader of the news release or, whatever. So my focus was on what am I going to, how can I get people's attention? And so that's what I did.
And were you able to use as well the fact that you had the marketing agency and stuff to get a press release out to, you knew where to sort of advise that this was happening? Yeah.
And I think it's not just finding the contacts, because that actually these days it is relatively easy to find the press contacts. It was just not being scared, because quite a lot of people are like, I couldn't go on the radio. I couldn't, I wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't want to speak to anyone. And that has, because I know that people are on your side and they're just not trying to trick you. They're trying to pull the story out of you. So, it doesn't bother me, or it never did right from the beginning. And I think that really helped.
Yeah, because I suppose at the end of the day, they want the best story. They want, as you say, they're not trying to trick you. They want it to be a good story. They want people to read it because they want more clicks, etc. And it's a kind of win-win. If you have a good story, if you make a good impact, they get more readers, they get more clicks, and everybody gets something out of it.
Yeah. So that really helped. And then so I wrote to the agent that I'd been wanting to work with, and I'd chosen her very specifically. I wanted somebody that had authors similar to myself, so she would know the right editors. She would already be working with those editors, and also that wasn't afraid to take on somebody who'd self-published first, because I was following some other self-published authors at the time in my genre, Kirsty Greenwood, Annabelle, Rachel Lucas, who'd all really, really successfully self-published and then gone on to get a traditionally published deal, which was what I wanted. So I approached this agent, and she said, actually, I noticed you, and I was going to approach you.
Brilliant.
Oh, wow. So the whole plan A worked out in the end then.
Nice.
Treat. Yeah.
And I think you've still got this model of sort of serializing your novels as well.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
That's, I suppose, as a concept, it goes back to sort of Dickens and things like that. So it's obviously a concept that works, but but it's not something you see very often. So I mean, what's the thinking behind that approach?
Okay, well, once I'd sent my book off to this agent, it was Christmas, so I left her with it over Christmas, and it was about the 2nd or the 3rd of January, and I got an email from an editor at Transworld, part of Penguin Random House, to say that she'd read the book and thought it was great, and she'd got an idea. Could she talk to me? So I remember coming off the phone thinking, because I'd never heard of Transworld, and because it's not the brand or the imprint that gets, it tends to be Doubleday and Black Swan and all these others. Yeah. And I thought, well, it's really nice that that she's got in touch with me, but I wish it was a big publisher. Afterwards, because I was so ashamed, it just shows that I know nothing about publishing. Anyway, we got to talk, and she said she'd been thinking about having something that would be serialized. As an ebook that people could download and just like keep that profile going. And she was on about monthly. Actually, I soon knocked that on the head. And so I came up with the idea of writing a story, a quarterly series, set on an allotment. And so it'd be spring, summer, autumn, winter, which it was January when we were speaking. So I thought, if I pull my finger out, we can start with spring. And that's what we did. So the first book to be serialized was Ivy Lane, and it came out in 4 parts. And then the following year, the following February, it came out as a paperback. And I'd never written like that before. It wasn't my idea. But once I'd done it once, I loved it. I absolutely love it.
I mean, I wanted to ask about the process of writing something that is going to come out in 4 chunks. Yeah. Does that, because that must change the planning of it and the structure of how you think, because you're not just writing one massive book. Yeah, exactly. Are you kind of wanting to leave it on a point every time that brings folk back? Leave folk wanting more. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Yes, it does change, and I really like that because I have a very, very short attention span. So what it means is I can write a book like part 1 and I've be done it, and I can celebrate that I've done something and I've achieved it and I've finished, and then I can move on to part 2. But in terms of the overall, I think in my head I'm thinking like TV. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking of a drama series or a comedy series of 4 parts, and there's an overarching theme that's there's going to be a big resolution at the end, but there's also each part has got its own little story arc and has some sort of resolution or some turning point, and what that does is it means it is, although they're character-driven books, it's also fairly content-driven in that they're working towards something in each part, so something happens. So it helps me with planning because I can sort of think, well, say if I normally go for about 120,000 words for 4 parts. So I know it's roughly 30,000 and I know I've got to get something in. So it does really divide it up for me in terms of what I need to. It keeps my pacing really tight.
I can see that.
And I really enjoy writing like it. And actually, in the books that I've written that aren't serialised, I've still in my head serialise them. Because I just find it a really neat way of writing, and it just keeps me on track.
I mean, it's quite it is, you're referring to sort of TV dramas and things like that. It is quite a sort of cinematic, or I'm just thinking of like film beats and act structure and all that sort of stuff. If you're doing it like that, then you must have to be much more disciplined than if you're, as you say, sitting down and writing a 120,000 word novel without that sort of in your head. It can go anywhere. You can pace it. The pace of it can sometimes be very slow at points, but you have to sort of keep the foot on the pedal for each part. So I can see that. Well, I do. Well.
The little story mountain picture you see. I have one of those for each part, and so I can see where my beats are, and I can, I know I've got to hit certain points by, so many thousand words. It's making it sound really formulaic, which it isn't, but it's just that that you can't just have some wafty scene.
No, totally. I think I think that's right. I think it is always important to. There is that kind of the arty-farty part of just having it has to flow nicely and has to go blah, blah. But there is that technical side of it, which you do need to make sure that you are having constant cliffhangers or having beats that they are overcoming obstacles and you're continually, it is quite, that kind of sine wave graph is quite accurate, I think. And it must be quite a nice way of doing it, breaking it into chunks where you've got that, and when you read it back in one go, if you buy the paperback, you've got that constant beat just going all the way through it, which is, we've all read books where it kind of waffles for a long time before it really gets going, but you kind of trim that right out if you have it. So that's quite a nice way to write it. I like that.
Yeah, you don't have the option of that first 10,000 words being a load of waffle.
Exactly.
Because, you've only got 30,000 words to get this first quarter of the story because you want people to hit buy for part 2.
And when these are serialized, so are you... what is the actual writing process? Obviously, you plan it out, but do you write the whole 120,000 words before it then gets out, or do you? Yeah, so you do,
Yeah. I write the whole novel. I mean, when I first wrote the first one, Ivy Lane, the idea was that we were going to publish the first one, and I was going to write the second. But I just thought, no, I just can't hand in a quarter of the novel and have it come out in, I think it was first week in April, and I can't then be panicking that I can't change the change the end sort of thing, or I've got to stick with what I've started. So I wrote like the wind and got that first book in and sent it off, and I had it all written. It wasn't all fully edited, but it was written before the first part came out. So
I can see as well that it's a good idea as well from the point of view of attracting new readers, in the sense that if you've got, they're much more likely to say, oh, it's 30,000 words, so I'll give that a go, and then if they like it, they'll suddenly buy into the rest of it. Whereas if they see a book that they don't know that well, but it's very long, they're less likely to jump on that. So there's a lot of pluses to it, I can see.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering whether, as my readership grows, whether people will bother with the series because they'll think, oh well, I'll wait to buy the whole book. So that remains to be seen.
I mean, it's almost like a subscription model, isn't it? You kind of, because how do you market the 30,000 word chunks in terms of price and stuff? Do you charge it on 99p?
So my Kindle books, my full books are full ebooks are $3.99.
Right. Okay.
Parts are 99p. So there's no cost benefit either way.
Yeah, exactly. So
that's really important to me.
Yeah,
I don't want people to think they've got to pay £4 for the part and then have the full book out at £1.99.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, because you lose trust, I suppose, when you do. Or people say, "Well, what's the point? I'll just wait till and then they might never buy the book in the end." Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, there's always going to be promotions. Ebook retailers will do a promotion for a month and drop the price, but the standard price is £3.99, which is really important.
And just staying on the writing process, how long do you spend on a plan, or does it depend on the story?
Time.
Right.
A long time.
Okay.
I mean, because I tend to deliver 2 books a year, but I'm already know what my next one will be, so I'm sort of planning in the background. But then when I've sent off the book and it's not on my to-do list at the time, I will then plan properly. But I spend a long time planning, and then I change the plan. But I just I have to have that plan in place to actually get going.
Yeah, I think it's very rare for people, even people who like to plan a lot at the start. It's very rare for in the writing of it not to change in some way, because that's what happens when you're telling the story. Things take unexpected turns. And
do you know what? I think because we all write in different ways. I think when some people say, "Oh, well, I don't plan," what they do is they write a draft, which is almost like their plan, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then they go back and edit that.
Yeah.
It's like a really long plan.
I think that's right.
A good friend of mine, Millie Johnson, who writes in the same genre as me, she hasn't got a clue. She says when she starts writing a book, she knows where the end point is, but she's basically driving in fog. And she can't see more than 2 meters in front of her. And so she just plows on. And then, her next edit will be, she has to then layer it sort of as she goes. Whereas mine is a very clean draft, my first draft, because I've spent a long time thinking about it and I know where I'm going. And I know my characters quite well before I start off.
Yeah. And I had read somewhere that you do obviously a lot of research, and if you've got a book that's set in a little town somewhere that you kind of have an idea for, you'll go to that town and spend a few days there to get a feel for the place. And is that something, in your genre of books where it's quite real life stuff, is it important to get those little things right? It's not like a sci-fi novel or whatever, but it's about the place is quite important.
Sometimes it's just, I love dialogue. I love writing dialogue. I hate writing description. So what I try and do is I'll try and go somewhere that inspires me to, and I'll actually think of things and I might take photographs. So when I'm back and I'm writing a scene about a rocky beach, I can actually look at a photograph and, and it just helps me from that perspective. Yeah. And scenery and things like that. I just really don't like, I skip over description in other people's books. Yeah. So it really does drive me mad to have to write it myself. So I do struggle with that. So to be somewhere really helps me sort of absorb it, and it just becomes easier to write it.
And that's probably nicer to actually read as well, because you're not just getting a page or so of what the beach is like. You're kind of getting what the beach is like through as the person's talking about the beach or walking over the beach. It's kind of dribs and drabs. Exactly. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So that's quite interesting. And I also like to go away and write anyway. So I will go. In fact, in January, I got an Airbnb just up the road from me, and went for a sort of a long weekend to just get, particularly when I'm at the beginning of a book and I just need to move into it. So I'm completely in it and I can just write loads. As I get further on and I'm more confident in the story, I can sort of write wherever. I could write in the kitchen when someone's cooking dinner. Yeah. So I'm just grateful that someone's cooking dinner. So stay close. But I do like to be away, and I go on lots of writing retreats. So there's 2 a year I go on. Right. I can't do it this year.
No.
Yes, I know.
But we go into this big property. We've got our own rooms, bathrooms, and desk, and we just write away and then meet for meals. And we're all commercial authors. We're all writing to deadlines. And it's just great. There's some sort of magic that happens that we all tend to write really, really huge word counts when we're there. So that is great as well. And just bouncing off each other. So that's really helpful.
And do you like to finish a draft before you share it with anyone else? Or do you get, do you try and get input from people as you're writing it?
I don't show anybody, but one of my friends, Rachel Lucas, we bounce plot stuff off each other. So, I'll ring her up and say, this bit isn't working, what do you think? And we'll talk it out. And she'll go, oh, why don't you? Da, da, da. So, and a lot of us do, I mean, all authors do that, I'm sure, but we do help each other out with plot. But I don't show anybody a manuscript at all.
It's funny. I think the whole plot thing can be, I think you're totally right. I think every author must struggle with that when you kind of feel you've written yourself into a corner and you're like, how do I get out here? Or I know I have to get to here, but I don't know how to get there. And I think you do just need someone out on the outside to look at it and be like, well, you're too close to it, you can't see, but why would you do that? And you think, obviously that's a really good idea.
Yeah. My friend actually was once sent a message into the WhatsApp group saying, I've had this whole group in this room for hours. I can't get them out of the room. And someone said, send a dog in. And then she went, oh, brilliant. The dog was tearing in, like, dispersed everybody. And we just got everybody out of the room. So it's great when that happens.
And given that your draft will obviously be quite a clean draft, as you said, when you send it to the editor or whatever, do you get, how much revision is given back? How many notes do you get? Or is it not too much work after that first draft?
She always says, just a light touch.
Right.
All it was going to take is a light touch. It'll be back to me in a few days, and like a month later, grimacing at the keyboard. So I'm editing at the moment. But the thing is, it's just the further you go on, although in theory you should be more confident, but part of you is less confident because you just want to be better every time. And I'm far more critical of myself now than that first book when I hadn't got a clue what I was doing, So editing, I'm really taking a lot of care with this book because I want it to be my best book. So I am really thinking about it. But so she'll send me some few notes. She'll do a few line edits, and then she'll send notes about the story. And there's only one real thing that she wants adding into this one. But as I'm going through it, I can see that it can be better. So I pretty much rewrite it.
I mean, and how do you know when it's ready to be sent in? I mean, obviously there's the deadline, which will be the hard stop, but how do you know, one more draft, then it's ready? What's the process?
Well, I only really do 2 drafts. So I'm going through, first of all, I get her notes, and anything that she's underlined in the document, I will change it. Then I go back to the beginning, read through her notes again, and then start from page 1 and work through. And then when I get to the end, I go back to her notes and check through that I've done everything that she wanted me to do, or at least the ones I agreed that I'm going to do. Yeah. And then I just send it off to her. Right, delete all her notes from the text so she can't see what she's saying.
I've done everything. I don't know what no problem.
Don't know what you mean.
I mean, have you ever had that where there's a suggestion made that you just think, no, that isn't going to work? Have you ever had that much of a conflict with your editor?
I would love to say yes, but actually, annoyingly, she is always right. She is always right. And I think, and you don't want to do what she says because it's more work, but you think deep down, it's going to be a lot more, lot better book for it. But she's, and the thing is, it's some fresh pair of eyes, isn't it, that's come on. And, she's not just looking at this manuscript, which is why I love my editor so much. She's looking at the long term, where this story sits within the other stories, and where we're going with it, and which territories is going to be published in, and what that might mean for those territories. So she's just such a clever old stick that I just tend to do what she says and then hate her for it.
Well, let's have a chat about your new book, which is My Kind of Happy, and it's out March 2021, I believe.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about the new book.
Okay, so that is another serial. So we're up to two parts are already out. The third part will be out on the 8th of October, then the 4th in November, paperback in March. So the idea for this one, My Kind of Happy, came to me when I was sitting outside a hotel for my sister's wedding a couple of years ago in the sunshine in Edinburgh, actually.
Oh, nice. Wonderful city.
Lovely, yeah, it was lovely. And I was scrolling through Facebook, and someone had put on a link to a TED talk by a guy called Sebastian Terry, who's Australian, and he had this sort of blog, I think it is, or website, or whatever, called 100 Things, and his slogan is sort of what's on your list. And something happened to him. He had a personal crisis, And he thought, he made him really look at his life and say to himself, if I were to die, and I know I was going to die tomorrow, would I look back at my life and be really proud of what I've achieved? Have I lived my life to my values? Am I happy? And ultimately he decided that he wasn't happy. So he decided overnight to change everything. And this premise really stuck with me. On a personal level, it really made me think about my own life and what made me happy and what I wanted, what was it I was still wanted to do and why am I not doing it? And I also thought that'd be a great premise for a book. So My Kind of Happy is all about somebody who's had a personal crisis. She's lost someone very close to her and has forgotten what makes her happy, and she's just going through the motions with life. And then something triggers her to start making her own happiness list, and off she goes. And the first thing that she thinks about is flowers because of her family history and what she used to do with her family. And so she decides to train to be a florist, and that was the first thing on her list. And off she goes, sort of thing. So that's what My Kind of Happy is about. A journey to happiness.
Brilliant. Yeah. And what was the process with it? Was it a fairly smooth book to write, or was it? Did you have any difficulties with that one?
Yeah, do you know what? It was a smooth one to write, I'm going to say. For once, it was fairly straightforward. I did lots of floristry courses to do it. I really wanted to get into. I actually enrolled on a beginner's floristry course as if I was going to open my own florist.
Right.
And I kept ringing and saying, you do know I'm not going to be a florist. And I am going to be rubbish. And there was all these other women there, stripping the leaves. And, can't find the scissors. So that was great fun. I learnt loads about that and I did really enjoy it. It was fairly straightforward actually.
Was it? Oh, sorry, Mark.
No. All I was going to say was that that it sounds to me like you're very much a believer in the sort of write what you know sense, in terms of not you'll go and research it and you'll live it almost to so that you can then transfer that into your writing. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean that one certainly in the first few books I was writing what I knew because. In my previous life as a marketing and PR agency, I had a stately home client, which I used the research for to write Wickham Hall. I used to do the PR for a cookery school, which became Plumberry School of Comfort Food. I'd worked for cafes, etc. And I had a client who has a farm, and I used her farm as the model for Appleby Farm. So, and I grew up next to an allotment, so Ivy Lane, used the allotments. So certainly from the early ones, but sometimes it's about a concept. So White Lies and Wishes was about 3 women that meet at a funeral, and everybody says, "Gosh, doesn't it make you think? You've got to seize the day." So that was the premise for that. So they're all different, really. And I think, eventually, if I just write what I know, I'm going to run out. So I've got to sort of expand my repertoire a bit.
I mean, it does sound to me like the concept of this book is, it does remind me a little bit of your own story, in which someone who kind of got to a point and was like, you know what, I want to change things up, and what makes me happy, it's writing, and you kind of almost start from scratch again, and
yeah,
which obviously was worked out well for you, and I suppose, is there maybe it's too much to say semi-autobiographical, but is there something there that in yourself that you kind of feel that you kind of click with that idea of starting from scratch and following what's important to you?
I think, it was a massive risk doing that, I have to say. Again, plan A, didn't have plan B. But I don't know about semi-autobiographical. I can't even say it. But I think there's always an element of the books that I write have an element of what's going on inside my head at the time. Looking back, I can see that now. I'm not as aware of it at the time necessarily, but looking back, very much so. So there is always something. It does it is your subconscious, isn't it?
Yeah.
Although it's
absolutely.
none of the characters are like me really, but there's something there. There's some point I'm trying to get across.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's true of any good book. You'll always get a bit of the author. Whether it doesn't need to necessarily be a representation of the author, but they'll put what they think about something in there in some way. I mean, obviously you mentioned it a bit earlier in relation to the writing retreat, but it sounds like a book that you do want at the moment with everything that's going on in the outside world, and all the restrictions we're under. I mean, have you found that that's affected your writing in any way? Have you found it more difficult or
Massively, yeah. I mean, I couldn't write. My husband was shielding right from day one, and that was a big, it was a big thing. We had a lot of fear in the house. We couldn't let him catch it, be exposed to the virus. So it's like, how are we going to get food in? How are we going to? So there's a lot of fear on practical things. Completely overtook my creative, my creative life, if you like. Luckily, I handed in the draft of the next book, which I'm now editing, in March, just as we were going into lockdown.
Right.
Just as my book came out, actually, and couldn't find its way onto the shelves from the big boxes in warehouses. So I'd handed that in, and then I just had a period of, I just thought, I'm going to just relax now about writing.
Yeah.
I'm ahead of schedule. I'm not going to stress about it. I'm just going to see what happens. And I did start writing eventually, I think in June. Was it June? I started writing my next book. Well, not my next book, but a next book, a new book. So I started writing that, but it didn't really flow that well. It was fine, and but then I left it for a bit, and I'm editing this now, and I'm going to pick it back up again next week.
I mean, it must be hard to, especially if you're writing a book in your genre, to get in that headspace when especially if you're in the situation you were in at home with your husband and everything's very oppressive and stressful, and trying to get into that headspace that you need to be able to write uplifting story. It's probably the worst kind of environment you could be in to write that sort of book.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's in a way it's sort of an escape, because when my husband was diagnosed with cancer a few years ago, actually it became a massive escape to be able to put myself in a world where everything's going really well. It was a really good thing to be doing. But this year it has felt really hard. But also I've had my two children, one's got COVID actually, and as we speak, in university, and locked in her room, having the freshest week of her life. And the other one's just about to go back. So I thought, this summer I've got two wonderful kids. I'm going to just enjoy my time at home with them, because next year they can't go anywhere, and let's just drink gin in the garden. So that's what we do.
Yeah, that's a good plan B there. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And obviously, so your books, I would say, have the genre that they are. You could see them on TV or something like that. Has there ever been?
Thanks.
Has there ever been interest in that? And would you want to write for TV in that way or anything?
Yeah, I suppose, knowing me, I would probably think, I know what I'm going to do next. I'm going to write something for TV. So yeah, possibly. I mean, I do look at certain dramas on TV, and I thought, I would love that so much. I did have a TV company looking at one of my books, actually, Wickham Hall, just when Downton Abbey was coming to an end. And I think it could have been a modern day Downton Abbey, but it didn't go anywhere, which is so often the way. So I do get a bit, and I had a movie scout was interested in seeing the manuscript for A Patchwork Family, which is the paperback I had out in March. And that's always so exciting. It just gives you a lift to know that somebody outside of just the publishing world is interesting. But I mean, exciting for me at the moment is just getting more foreign rights deals. So I've been published in Germany for a long time. I'm now going to be published in Sweden and Holland. So that it's just great to see that. That growth.
Exactly. And would you ever want to write in a different genre? You think? Would you anything else? A horror book or a gritty action thriller?
Well, I sort of managed to shoehorn dark bits into my own. In fact, it was funny. Well, it's not funny. Well, it is funny. The Swedish publisher was initially going to take one of my books, and then we got a message back to say, actually, we're a bit worried about the storylines. I was like, what in my books? You know that. And they say, well, there is a transgender issue, 2 rapes and a stillbirth. Is that?
When you put it like
You
that.
think more like really feel good fiction, you know? And I was like, yeah. So I do. I do get quite a good dose of reality into my fiction as well already. But would I change genre? I think I could probably have a go at something a bit more emotional, possibly in the future, and also maybe something with an older protagonist, because most of the protagonists in my sort of market tend to be in their 30s. I do get characters that are coming in, so sometimes I have 3 main characters, and I try to have a range of ages. You know, and I quite like that. So I'm sure I can't be 85 and still writing about the 32-year-old singleton looking for a meet cute. So eventually I'm going to have to grow up myself, aren't I?
Do you tend to write the books that you like to read? Do you read the same types of books?
Yeah, so, to a certain extent. I don't like them too fluffy, but there are certain authors who I will read and read and read. I don't even have to read the blurb and I'll pick them up, you know. Yeah. They've got a bit of bite to them. And mine have got humour, but they've also got a bit of bite to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I like a bit of bite.
and I'm just going to go back to the self-publishing thing, because obviously a lot of our listeners are interested in writing and stuff, and that is a route that people can now obviously take much more easily than in the past. But you know, what advice would you give to someone that was going to self-publish now? You know, what's the best way for them to proceed in that?
I invested a lot in my first book. I was very conscious that whatever I put out, because I wanted to have more than one book, I was very conscious that, you know, readers are going to make a decision on whether they like my writing on that first book. So I invested in a good cover designer. I had a copy. I had editors. You know, I really spent a lot of time and money on getting that first book right. So I think of it as a business. This is your product, and it's your first product, and it's got to hit the market, you know, and make a good impression. So that's the first thing, is get the book right. I think, you know, marketing is really, really key. There's some great things out there now, resources in terms of helping you advertise. You know, so I would definitely look into Amazon advertising and Facebook advertising, and just be, in terms of social media, I would say be really generous with your own content. So promote other people, and don't have a complete timeline of just posting links to your own book, which is really important. But I mean, there is so much information out there now to help people self-publish. To be fair, there was when I started. You know, the reason I didn't carry on self-publishing was that I knew that I sort of believe in experts, and I thought I knew I wouldn't be able to spend the time on the marketing side. Although I quite like getting the ideas, and I can then delegate them and get someone else to do them, and then focus on the writing. So, because you know, there are only so many hours in the day. Yeah. And so that was the focus for me.
And has the marketing strategy changed from when you were doing it yourself to when you were picked up? You know, is it still the same idea? Is there things that they do differently, or is it literally just a case of someone else doing it and you get to step back and write?
Well, I guess the biggest change is live events. When you're going into bookshops and doing book events and things like that, that's much harder to organise by yourself. And obviously with a traditional publisher, a lot of their marketing support will be behind the paperback, behind the actual printed version. Whereas as self-publishing, obviously, you know, you don't have to restrict it to the 8 weeks following publication. You can promote that book all year round, which is, you know, very different, but quite tiring.
Yeah, absolutely. I can absolutely imagine that.
And what was the last book that you read?
Strangers by C.L. Taylor. I love a good psychological thriller. It's brilliant.
Nice. And what was the last TV show that you watched?
Oh, God. It was Gentleman Jack.
All right.
Oh
okay.
yeah, I've not watched that myself actually.
And
It's
that
good,
is
though.
literally the last thing I watched. And that was, when was that? Beginning of this year?
Yeah,
I
that
watched
was
it.
quite well.
Oh, well.
Yeah. I haven't watched TV. All I've watched this year is Finding Nemo.
Well, that answers our next question, which is what's the last film you watched? But there you go.
Any
I'm
reason
too
for
busy
the
outside at the gin bar. That's the problem.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Fair enough. That's fair enough. And the very, very last thing we do is a quick fire either or. So there's no right or wrong answer apart from one question. And I'll start us off with iPad or newspaper.
iPad.
Nice. This bodes well for the next question. Then.
Well, it's not this one. TV or cinema?
Cinema. Love the cinema.
Yeah, I have to say I was at that point where I was like, oh, do I really want to see Tenet in the cinema, but do I want to risk going back to the cinema, blah, blah. And then, because I think there's, as much as you can put films back on the TV, they put a lot of big films are going straight to TV now, which is great because you get to watch them in your own home, but there's something about the cinema experience which is just,
We've got a lovely independent cinema in Nottingham called the Broadway, and it's just such a lovely experience going to, going
nice. Hopefully at one point that gets opened up again soon. And real book or ebook?
Oh, now that's hard because I do really like them both.
Don't feel pressured into answering the typical classic answer. Just go for what's in your heart.
Yeah. Do you know what? I love my Kindle.
Yes.
Mostly because I can read it with the light off and I don't disturb my husband.
Just one of the many practical positives of
I
reading
take it
ebooks.
Marco likes a paper.
Well, no. Tarek loves ebooks, and I think this is like we've had about
Maybe
45
5
guests or something. And about 5 people have said ebooks. So
You're one of
always...
the chosen few, Cathy. You've made it to the final group. Excellent. Well, I think it's safe to say that season 5 is the comeback season for the ebook army.
This is where it all begins for you.
This is it. This is the twist that everyone's been waiting for.
For those of you that don't know, this is a common theme we ask our guests about this, and I would say most of the guests, and when I say most, I would say about 40 of them have said real books. But certainly these past few episodes, we've had quite a few fans of ebooks.
People aren't afraid anymore, Marco. People are willing to actually say what they really believe and not just go along with everyone else.
Or they've not been able to get to a bookshop because of COVID.
Listen, silver linings, Marco. Silver linings and everything.
But thanks very much to Cathy for taking the time to speak to us. I thought it was a really good episode, and there was a lot of good advice there, about if you're wanting to get into self-publishing, treating it like an investment almost, taking that time to get editors, to get a proper cover. All of these things, I think, they can sometimes seem obvious, I think, but also they're definitely overlooked. If you look at the Kindle store self-published stuff, a lot of it just doesn't have any of that sort of professional sheen to it, which I think can make a massive difference when you're launching your first book. And obviously she launched it in that very unique way with the phone box as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I think now more than ever, when you're, as you say, we're not going to bookstores, everything's online really, you do judge it by the cover. And, as much as you'd like to think it's the words that count, for so much of it is what does it look like, and it is definitely worth paying someone to make a proper front image that looks professionally made. It doesn't look cheap. It looks like there's a quality product inside.
Yeah, I think so.
If you spent the time and the effort to write a great book, don't give it a crap front image that
exactly.
just, no one wants to click on.
That you've created on Microsoft Paint or something. But genuinely, thanks very much to Cathy for taking the time to come on to the podcast. We really appreciate that. And the third part of My Kind of Happy has just launched at the time this episode is going out. So you can pick that up along with the previous 2 parts. And then the full book will be available in March next year.
Absolutely.
But we've got another great guest next week. And actually, it's not a writer.
Yeah, it's a very interesting chat we have next week with Mr. Benjamin Dreyer, who is a copy editor over at Penguin Random House.
He's the chief copy.
Copy, not just any copy editor, the chief copy editor. And he's got a very interesting career and a very interesting job about what he does there, how he edits books, what he looks for when he's editing books, what changes he makes and how they come out the other end, and that kind of behind the scenes chat about that people maybe don't really know much about, or there's not really much written about. So it's a really fascinating look.
You know, if you're interested in writing yourself, then it's a great behind the scenes look at one of the most important parts of the process. But also, even if you're not wanting to get published yourself, he's a fascinating and really funny and interesting guy. And he also has released a couple of things recently. He's released Dreyer's English, which is a sort of style guide, but it's not a sort of staid style guide. It's written in a very entertaining way, but it's also really on point and really useful. So I definitely recommend picking that up. And he's also released a game as well, State, which is it sort of gives you paragraphs or sentences that you then have to try and copy edit. So we talk about all of that next week, but he is a really great guest, a really funny guy. So I would definitely recommend tuning in for that one.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UKPage1, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.